as you can see, I have picked up my next project. So this is a 1983 ZX 1100 GPZ. The first thing on my list to do is to get this bike running well and to get it to a point where it is safe to drive. So over the next couple of episodes with this bike, we will be looking at what it's going to take to get the bike running well. Currently, it wasn't firing on all four cylinders very well when I test drove it. When I looked at the bike, there were some intake boots that were off from the airbox to the fuel injection, and that all, just in looking at it this morning, that stuff needs to be put back together snugly and done right. So I will go ahead and do that. The clutch was also slipping, but I have a feeling that is because of the clutch cable. It could also be the push rod that goes from one side of the engine to the other. So I will be looking at both the clutch cable and the push rod. I noticed that the brakes are low on brake fluid, and I'm sure the brake fluid itself is super old. So I will go ahead and replace the brake fluid and bleed out the brakes on this bike. Again, when I first get a bike, it's about making sure it's mechanically sound, that it runs well, and before I even want to take it out on the road at all, I want to make sure that I can stop if it does run well. It is day one of the Kawasaki GPZ 1100 project, and I have been in the process starting with the rear wheel here. I put it up on my stand and realized the chain had been adjusted severely tight, and the rear brakes were hanging up just a little bit. So what I've done is adjusted my chain. So I've got about an inch of travel on the chain, and then on the rear caliper here, I've actually taken this apart and lubricated my pins. And I've also, while it was apart, I pumped up the brake and pushed the inner caliper, the piston in there, out about an inch. And then once it was out, I cleaned it with a little bit of steel wool and a little bit of WD-40, and I've moved that in and out quite a few times, and now it spins freely like it should. The brake isn't hanging up. I have noticed that the brake fluid level is low, and it looks like it could certainly be replaced. So what I'm going to do right now is bleed these brakes. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move up here, and not sure if you can see it or not. It's a little bit hard to get the light on here, but you can see the clamp there for that intake boot. The first two intake boots on this side are not clamped properly, and they're letting air through, and consequently the bike doesn't run good. So what I want to do is get the airbox pushed forward a little bit and clamp those like they should be. Make sure everything is seated properly. I'll also look on the backside, make sure that those clamps are seated properly. I think the fuel injection system actually needs to be angled upwards a little bit. But I'll go ahead and do that, and then I will move on to my front brakes and make sure that they are set up like they should be. But right now we're just going to be going back here and bleeding the rear brakes. Okay, now you can see the brake fluid coming out is clear, just like it is in here. So we will go ahead and pull this off and close up our fluid, and we're done with the rear brakes. All right, on day one, what I was able to finish on the GPZ was I put a fuse in the battery tender and got the battery up to a full charge. I bled the rear brake and cleaned out the rear brake piston and caliper, and I also discovered that right here on the fuel filter, there's a bunch of crud in the bottom of the fuel filter. So I'm going to need a new fuel filter here. I also discovered that right there on the bottom of the tank, it's dripping fuel. So I tightened those up overnight, dried everything out, and I've got drips formed this morning. So it's a slow leak, but I'm going to have to get a gasket for the bottom of the gas tank there. Another thing that I did yesterday is both the intake boots on the engine side of the fuel injection and on the airbox side were completely not as they should be. So I loosened up the ones on the engine side and the airbox side, pushed the fuel injection further in, seated it properly on the engine side of things, and then actually had to take some of these clamps off. The clamps were on backwards and everything on the intake side of the fuel injection, on the airbox side. So I had to pull the airbox back, get my clamps put on properly, and then push everything up and snug it up. So now I've got a good airtight seal between the engine, the fuel injection, and the airbox. So that's good. I've also started lubricating the clutch cable here. I'm doing that at 2 points. I'm actually doing it up at the top, and I'm doing it down here at the bottom here, just spraying that bottom section full of WD-40 and letting it kind of run down through. I will also, before I run this on the road at all, I want to bleed out the front brakes and make sure that the front brakes are functioning properly. So all new fluid. I'll probably pull those calipers as well, lubricate the piston, make sure it's going retracting back into the caliper properly. So just making sure my braking system is up to snuff. Really, that's more important than anything else, is the safety. If I get it out and it does run good, I want to be able to stop. So another thing that I found was right up in here, and I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it, but there is a crack in the fairing stay, and it's loose. So I'm going to have to pull the fairing off, pull that bracket off, and take it to a shop and have it welded.